Perhaps it was because of the existence of the king stone worm, but up to now, the only creature Xiaoshuan encountered was the insect which dragged him away earlier. All the rest of the other creatures and worms seemed to have disappeared. Probably all those eyeless spiders and other worms hid in their dens since the king stone worm woke up and took a walk around. As for the insect which was just beheaded by Xiaoshuan, perhaps it was just too anxious to take revenge. If that was true, perhaps Xiaoshuan should go back to the three-forked crossing and choose a new path. Never mind. Xiaoshuan shook his head and continued to follow the intuition. It was very strange and weird in this mountain. Xiaoshuan grabbed the antenna that he had chopped off and coiled it around one of his arms. Except for the hook with serrations on the top, the other parts of the antenna were quite soft, and Xiaoshuan felt no pain when he coiled it around his arm. Now, Xiaoshuan had no idea which part of the mountain he was in because he was very clear that he absolutely had no sense of direction inside as he spent more and more time in the tunnels. It was quite peculiar, he had quite a strong sense of direction, but it didn't work in here. In fact, Xiaoshuan loved to play maze games in his former life, and he could memorize every place he had been to. When the others were having a headache about the messed up directions, Xiaoshuan could always find the right one correctly. Even now, if he needed to get back to the tribe along the hunting route, he wouldn't have the slightest hesitation. However, in this mountain, he was confused. There were many tunnels and creatures in the mountain. Aside from the king stone worm, there were also many other kinds of creatures. The eyeless spiders and the insect killed by Xiaoshuan were only two of the many kinds. In theory, there should be traces of many different creatures living together. Unfortunately, none of those traces could be found. There were no scratches, no remains, no cobwebs, no pieces of shells, nothing, as if nothing ever existed. Just like when hunting groups created some marks to show the right route, it would be totally erased by the time someone came in again. If the totem's power really could guide those who lost their way to the right direction and path, how could their ancestors then have been lost in the mountain? Xiaoshuan kept walking forward following this feeling. When there was a crossing or a fork, he would carefully sense the surroundings with this special ability to choose which way to go. Xiaoshuan only hoped that his intuition doesn't go wrong or lie to him, else he would be doomed. Just as the ancestors in Langga's stories, he won't be able to come back once he lost his way in here. Compared with the intuition brought by the flame, Xiaoshuan had a stronger feeling when he used his special ability. He felt that he was moving down, and probably, he had left the mountainside long ago and he almost reached the foot of the mountain. However, his intuition told him to keep walking. Later on, he saw some small worms which were the same size as an adult's fist. In his vision, they were just balls of pale gray, and the vague rough outlines were the only thing that Xiaoshuan could see with his special ability. When the worms approached Xiaoshuan, he would use the antenna to whip them away. In fact, those little worms seemed to be quite afraid of the smell of that antenna. When Xiaoshuan whipped them with the antenna, they tended to run away promptly, quite frightened. Xiaoshuan speculated that perhaps those little worms were the food that the insect usually ate, which should be a reasonable explanation for their panicked behavior. Along with the antenna whip, the toothed sword also held the essence of the insect. Fist-sized worms were crawling all over the wall, and Xiaoshuan could even hear the faint but numerous sounds as they wriggled on the wall. But wherever Xiaoshuan went, those worms would keep away from him. If he had not killed that insect and chopped down its antenna, wouldn't it have been troublesome for him now? Even though the worms were not big in size, in large quantities, they could be pretty difficult to deal with. At first, Xiaoshuan only cut off that antenna for revenge, however unexpectedly it was quite useful in this situation. The unique feeling was gradually getting intenser. If we say that earlier, his feeling was like a little breeze, now it could be considered as a gust of strong wind, indicating the right direction. It shouldn't be the way out, but both the totemic power and that special ability told him to go along the same way. Why was that exactly? Some kind of a treasure. Even with a clear indication, Xiaoshuan didn't proceed faster, but kept to the same pace, while being alert of the surroundings. Luckily, aside from those little worms, there was no other creature. It was closer. Xiaoshuan clenched his toothed sword and was a little bit tense. After walking in the cave for so long, Xiaoshuan could always feel the breeze and slight sounds. However, the more he moved forward, the more he felt that he was heading to a dead end. Xiaoshuan continued to walk along the way, and soon enough there were no more worms on the wall. Tea was very quiet around here, and when all the sounds of the worms faded away, it was complete silence. It was not only the silence, there wasn't even airflow in the surroundings. There seemed to be light in the front. Xiaoshuan hesitated. Light. Xiaoshuan switched to the normal view, it was still dark. He realized that he could only see the light spot in the darkness when he used his special ability to switch to the special view. Xiao Xuan went towards that light spot, and all of a sudden, he felt kind of suffocated in his heart. He could not tell what exactly that feeling was. It was like something ancient, desolate and with endless sadness. The light spot grew bigger and now it seemed like a light cover, shrouding that small piece of land. When Xiao Xuan finally reached the spot and was able to see the situation inside the light cover clearly, one of his eyelids twitched suddenly. Inside the light cover there were 4 skeletons, at least it was so in Xiao Xuan's view. In the middle of the cover, there was a skeleton on its knees, and the other 3 were surrounding him. The 4 skeletons were genuflected in the same gesture, which was also the most respectful salute in the ritual in the tribe, on their knees, with 2 hands crossed before the forehead and kowtowed in the same direction. Around those 4 skeletons, there were long spears and stone knives buried underneath the ground. Those stone weapons were all in a very dark color, especially the long spear beside the man in the middle, which was almost black. Obviously they were all excellent stone tools, which can only mean that all 4 warriors used to be strong and powerful ones in the tribe, especially the one in the middle. He must have had quite a high position. And the direction in which they were worshipping, even though Xiao Xuan had a confused sense of direction, he had a feeling that it was the tribe. Xiao Xuan glanced over those 4 skeletons and their stoneware, and then his sight focused on the skeleton in the middle. There was a bone ornament in front of his chest. Xiao Xuan did not know what kind of bone it was made from, but it had a brighter color than any of the skeletons in Xiao Xuan's special view. Ever since he had obtained that special capability, Xiao Xuan had given serious thought and done much research about the special view. In his special view, different warriors of different level had bones of different colors. For instance, junior warriors had pale gray skeletons, while intermediate warriors had white skeletons. For senior warriors, such as the Chief Ao, he had bright white skeletons. However, right now, all those 4 skeletons were in the color of bright white. Although they were in different shades, it was true that they were all quite advanced warriors. Among them, the one in the middle had the brightest color. But even so, these 4 skeletons could never be compared with the bone ornament. But that wasn't the most important thing he had observed. The thing that caught Xiao Xuan's undivided attention was a ball beset in the bone ornament. It was no bone, but it lit up the surroundings like a light bulb, which created the light cover that Xiao Xuan saw earlier. Once again, he switched the view and withdrew his special ability. This time he tried to look at it with the normal view, only to find that it was still nothing but darkness, with no trace of light. However, when he used his special ability to see, he noticed that the ball was as bright as always, and the light it created enveloped the surroundings into its cover. With a little more observation, Xiao Xuan also found that unlike the other 3 skeletons, the skeleton in the middle was the most complete one in good condition. The others had sunk into the ground to some extent. The things that were located closer to the edge of the light cover sank deeper into the ground. In the range of the light cover, some scattered stoneware could also be seen. They were all made out of fine stones, but some of them had already submerged under the ground with only parts of them still above to be seen. However, outside the range of the light cover, Xiao Xuan had not seen any stoneware, skeletons, or bones. This mountain was eating people. Not only people, it was eating other things as well. If the insect killed by Xiao Xuan wasn't eaten by other creatures, its remains probably would also be swallowed by the mountain gradually. In fact, this mountain had eaten a lot, for instance, the long-lost humans, dead worms or insects, and other things in here. Aside from those caves and tunnels, nothing had been left. However, even after hundreds of years, the warriors and stoneware in the range of that light cover could be preserved up to today, because of the lighting ball. Surely the man in the middle was one of the ancestors in the tribe, and it was highly likely that he was one of the members of the first batch of warriors who contributed in establishing the hunting route. This skeleton was so strong that it might even be stronger than the Chief Ao. However, Xiao Xuan had not heard about him from Lang Ga. Xiao Xuan wasn't sure who the other 3 skeletons were. Perhaps they were also part of the first batch of warriors like the one in the middle, or they might also be from a later generation and got lost in the tunnels. Whether it was right or wrong, Xiao Xuan felt a little baffled seeing the 4 skeletons here. So, the direction that the totem led, the so-called intuition, all meant here. Why did he feel that the ancestors were entrapping their descendants? The warrior in the middle should be the first skeleton here, while the other 3 could be with him, or just followed their intuition and came here. Could those lost ones have found this place following the intuition of the totem, and then waited for their death in here? No, that shouldn't be the case. Maybe those people knew it was impossible for them to get out, or they had tried 1,000 times but failed in the end, so they came back to this place and decided to stay in the circle of protection. Even after hundreds of years, their bodies were not swallowed by the mountain. Xiao Xuan had a tingling sensation, thinking that even the oldest batch of warriors with a strong capability did not manage to flee from this place. How could he survive as a junior warrior? Xiao Xuan stepped forward and entered the range protected by that light cover, and immediately felt a sense of warmth, which eased his tense nerves a little bit. But that was all. Xiao Xuan reached out his hand to the nearest skeleton, and he touched a mummified hand. It was not bones, but air-dried flesh. Even though the warrior was long gone, he could still feel the strength inside the remains. There was no ugly smell, and Xiao Xuan thought, perhaps the stench of death was assimilated by the tunnel. Xiao Xuan also touched the other two warriors in the circle. Like the first one, they were also mummified. But when he touched the one in the middle, he surprisingly found that this one was only a little bit dry and his body was in much better condition than the others. So it was all due to the light ball's effect. The light created by the ball could not only protect the things inside from being swallowed by the mountain, but also preserve the remains. Even other creatures living in the mountain would not approach and feast on the bodies. This must be a treasure of the tribe. Of course, only warriors of high status would be able to have it. However, now it was not the time for that. What should he do? Will he be the fifth corpse kneeling here with them? Xiao Xuan sat on the ground, pretty upset. Did the others in the tribe know about the totem's trap? As he was cursing in his mind, Xiao Xuan suddenly felt a flame somersault in his mind. Xiao Xuan hesitated, and quickly he calmed down and began to stimulate the totemic power in his body. This time, it was yet another intuition, telling him that he was able to get out. An idea flashed in his mind and Xiao Xuan jumped up out of excitement when he captured the thought. After pacing back and forth for a bit, Xiao Xuan stimulated the other power inside him, and used it to confirm that intuition. You can walk out. Can. Perhaps he should trust the totem for yet another time. Well, that was the only option, and he had to trust it anyway. Xiao Xuan took a step. With just one step, the totemic flame in his mind flared, and it flared again as he took another second step. Unlike when he used his totemic power during the hunt, this time the flame flared up acting as if it was angry. Xiao Xuan stopped and looked back at those four skeletons kneeling down within the light cover. Did they have any resentment when they died? After all, they were trapped in here, till death. For people in the tribe, every time when there's trouble, they would perform a divination to ask their ancestors and interpret their guidance through the totemic power and flames. However, the ancestors, the totemic power and the flame, all couldn't help them to find a way out. However, when Xiao Xuan took another close look at those four skeletons, he found that they were so devout in the gesture, lacking any sort of resentment. It was the highest standard of worship, facing the direction of the tribe. Xiao Xuan took a step back, and the totemic flame did not flare up. It was quite calm. Yet one step further away from the skeletons, the totemic flame flared up again. Then one step back, the flame became calm again. There were quite a few things that Xiao Xuan was not able to understand. After all, he was not the same as the indigenous people here. But the more time he spent here, the deeper he understood about the fact that this world was filled with all kinds of mysterious powers in which you had no other choice but to believe in. Xiao Xuan stared at the skeletons kneeling inside the circle. Were they expecting him to take them back? It was a pity that they had been kneeling here for hundreds of years. Xiao Xuan sighed deeply. After thinking for a while, he kneeled down on one knee with two palms crossed before his forehead and made 4 salutes towards these 4 ancestors, just as when he did during the ritual ceremony. Xiao Xuan walked towards them and pulled out his knife to dig out the bones which had sunk in the ground. Originally he was just taking a chance, but unexpectedly he managed to dig the bones out. And judging by the appearance of the bones, they were well preserved. So Xiao Xuan patiently dug out all the bones and all the stoneware that was buried underneath. He tossed all the small pieces of stoneware inside his animal skin bag, and tied all the big pieces together with a leather rope he carried with him. Those were fine stones, and it would be a big waste just to leave them in here. As for the 4 skeletons, no, those 4 mummies. Xiao Xuan used that long antenna of that insect to tie them together. I sincerely apologize for this discourtesy from the bottom of my heart. Xiao Xuan whispered. After he finished doing all that, he carried all the things and the ancestors on his back. Well, that was heavy. Unexpectedly, even though the ancestors were all mummified, they were still heavier than stones. With those 4 mummies on his back, and all stoneware at hand, Xiao Xuan felt that he was like a moving light bulb. The light it created drove away all creatures. It certainly helped Xiao Xuan to avoid those insects and worms. Before Xiao Xuan got near to the swarm of small worms, the worms hurriedly diverged and ran away as if they had encountered something disgusting. Xiao Xuan did not even have to whip them away. Still, he followed his intuition. This time, the intuition was indicating a different way. Not only that, Xiaoshuan felt that he was walking through other tunnels instead of heading to the mountainside. There was no creature that dared to block his way. Also, those eyeless spiders that he met halfway all fled before Xiaoshuan approached them. Wow, why couldn't the ancestors manage to find a way out with such a treasure at hand? So, were they still just lost in the end? And since they could neither defeat the king stone worm nor split the mountain directly, they were trapped and died inside. Xiaoshuan took 2 breaks during the journey and used the breaks to eat some of the meat jerky he had brought. It was quite tiring and he needed to refuel the energy before continuing on the march. He did not know for how long he had been walking. It could have been a few hours or dozens of hours. Xiaoshuan's head was totally messed up, for in here it was impossible for him to calculate the time attentively. The only thing he could do now was follow his intuition. Finally, Xiaoshuan smelled the air of the forest. After spending so much time in a place filled with the smell of stones, Xiaoshuan was delirious with joy because of the fresh air. There's wind. The wind came from the path ahead. Xiaoshuan sped up and switched his sight to the normal view. He found that light spot. It was the light from the outside. He was getting out of the mountain. He managed to get out of the mountain. However, since totemic power could really lead the way, why were the ancestors of the tribe ultimately trapped to death inside the mountain? And could only worship at the direction of the tribe. Even if he ignored the ancestors, why couldn't the warriors in the tribe now walk into the mountain if they weren't familiar with the paths yet? Xiaoshuan had no answer for that, and probably the only thing he could think of about his difference with others was the special ability that he had. The others in the hunting group were still waiting by the exit of the cave until the next day in the afternoon. Originally they were to leave at noon, but Mai and Ling Ga suggested to wait a little longer, which was the only reason why all the warriors were staying by the cave. In fact, Ling Ga and the others had already completely lost hope by that time, but still, they were not willing to admit it. Let's go, or else we won't be able to make it in time. Another warrior of Mai's age proposed as he looked up at the sky. They did not bring much food, for they had stored all the game they had hunted in the first location. Since they were trekking towards the second location, they only brought moderate amount of food. Now, some of the warriors already had an empty food bag. According to tradition in the hunting group, nobody shall leave when waiting for a comrade. Even running out of food, no warrior shall go for hunting. That was in fact a memorial service in disguise. Although their comrade might be gone forever without any remains, others should wait to pay their respect in some way. Rationally speaking, all of them knew that whoever had gone lost would never return. Once they left the cave, it meant that they gave up on waiting, which was also considered the end of the morning and the beginning of the hunt. It was a different nature of act, for they won't return to the cave unless the hunting was over. Most warriors in the hunting group thought that it was already enough for them to have waited for so long. Xiaoshuan was no big guy, and neither did he have any important status in the tribe. So there was no need for them to spend days in mourning. They had to start the hunt soon. Mai looked at the sinking sun and told everybody that they should prepare to go. Before leaving, everybody lowered their heads and pointed at the middle of their eyebrows with their index fingers. Every time when someone was lost, the others would pay their respect in that simple way. Let's go. Mai led the others to leave the cave after the morning. They were heading to another cave in the mountainside, which was their second stronghold. Step by step, Xiaoshuan walked towards the exit of the cave with the ancestors on his back and stoneware in his bags. After spending so much time in the darkness, Xiaoshuan did not feel uncomfortable seeing the light again. Xiaoshuan was able to hear the sounds of insects and birds outside, and he was in quite a good mood. The exit of the cave was much narrower than the entrance at the mountainside. Perhaps it was as big as other entrances and exits a long time ago, but now it was half blocked by the falling stones, and the rest of it became covered by vines and leaves by the passing of time. The mountain was not different from any other mountains on the surface, and there was also grass, bushes, trees, pools and brooks. It was only in the inside of the mountain that was different from other mountains. So on the surface, all the plants and animals were similar, and the list of all the names of hunting group leaders in generations were still carved on the wall near the entrance, and that wouldn't be erased at all. By the exit of the cave, Xiaoshuan stood still and listened closely to the sounds outside. He observed the surroundings through the vines and made sure that no dangerous creature was there. So carefully, he pushed aside those vines and stepped out. When exiting, he paid extra attention to those mummified people on his back, because they were fragile. Feeling the not-so-bright sunshine, Xiaoshuan felt like he was somehow reborn. If he was in a safe environment, he would probably shout it out to express his euphoria. Earlier he was already used to seeing those skeletons and in fact, Xiaoxuan was not afraid of them. However, now during the daylight, he looked back and only found 4 mummies. Xiaoxuan calmed himself down and began to hypnotize himself. It's fine, they are the ancestors of the tribe. Even if they are mummified, dried, and darkened, they are as brave and extraordinary as always. He did not untie those 4 people immediately. The treasure was still effective, and Xiaoxuan wanted to shelter himself under the blessing of the ancestors before he could rejoin the hunting group. Xiaoxuan didn't know where he was standing, but looking up, he could still see those flying figures in the sky, so he figured that perhaps he was still at the same mountain. It was not the mountainside, but the mountain foot, and he felt that it was already the other side of the mountain. It was impossible for him to run around in the unknown environment without a plan. He was not capable of dealing with the ferocious beast by himself. At the same time, Xiaoxuan had to be prepared not to be grabbed by those big birds flying in the sky. So he could only try to make contact with the hunting group first. Looking down at the body, Xiaoxuan found a layer of gray stone powder all over his animal skin clothes, as well as on his hands. He rubbed his hands together to dust off those stone powder. Originally he intended to grab some leaves from the vines to wipe his hands, but on second thought, he gave up on the idea, for he didn't know whether it was poisonous or not. After rubbing his hands, Xiaoxuan curled 2 of his fingers and put them into his mouth. Right after that, a rhythmic whistling sound came out. Yelling was absolutely forbidden here, for that loud noise might draw the attention of some creatures. Hence Xiaoxuan used the old way of the hunting team, which was the whistle. As he was blowing the whistle, he decided to make a deer whistle for later use when he returns to the tribe. Warriors in the hunting group who were heading to the second stronghold hesitated at the sound, especially Qiao, Mai and the other few intermediate totemic warriors. Their hearing was a little better than junior warriors. When others could only hear a vague sound, they could hear it clearly in their ears. Mai. That is, Qiao pulled on Mai's arm excitedly. Mai hinted her to calm down, and listened to the distant sound carefully. It was distant, but still, Mai figured that it was a signal of the hunting team. Also, it seemed that only Xiaoxuan could blow the whistle in that way. However, they had just left the exit of the cave, and the whistle was obviously not from the cave, but down the mountain. You wait here for a moment, Mai said, and in a hurry, he rushed down the mountain. After only a few leaps, his figure disappeared in the forest. Is it really Xiaoxuan? Lenga was thrilled as well as stunned. Although he could not hear it clearly, it was not his first time hearing that whistle. When he found those 2 kids after the thorn black wind, he was following that similar whistle. Not possible. How could Xiaoxuan come out while all our ancestors were lost inside? A warrior said. He wasn't wishing Xiaoxuan not to come back, it was just his respect and worship towards the ancestors that stopped him from believing in Xiaoxuan's capability. But the sound was exactly the same as the one that we heard when we found him the last time, Aang said. Lenga could hardly restrain himself thinking that Xiaoxuan was still alive. Not only Lenga, the others wanted to know the answer as badly as him. Let's go and see. Yeah, let's go. As long as we are still in the mountain, we won't encounter any large-sized ferocious beasts. We can go to the cave later. I want to go, too. Normally, warriors in the hunting group always followed the leader's command and they respected the rules. When the leader asked to wait, they would just wait. However, it wasn't normal circumstances now. Ever since the hunting route was established, almost nobody had succeeded in finding a way out after getting lost inside. Even the ancestors could not manage to do that. The few intermediate totemic warriors discussed for a moment, and they all chose to go and see. So, after Mai rushed towards that direction, the others in the hunting group followed his footsteps. Mai followed the sound and arrived at the mountain foot, only to find someone covered in gray standing there. At first, Mai paid no attention to the thing Xiaoxuan was carrying, nor the stoneware laid beside his feet, for he was totally stunned. Although covered in a layer of gray stone powder, Xiaoxuan was merely a kid, and one could easily recognize him by his size. You are all right, Xiaoxuan. The others in the hunting group soon followed Mai here, and all of them recognized Xiaoxuan as well. Lenga approached him quickly and planned to give him a warrior's hug to celebrate his survival. But after he saw what was on his back, Lenga stammered, Xiaoxuan, what is on your back? All the attention was fixed on Xiaoxuan's back. Well, this. Xiaoxuan turned so that the other could have a clearer picture of the people he was carrying. He pointed at them and said, they are the ancestors. However, Xiaoxuan indeed underestimated the weight of the word ancestor in people's hearts. Once the word ancestor was spoken out loud, Xiaoxuan found that all the warriors in the hunting group seemed to be frozen. They just stood still, but all the eyes turned red, and their breaths turned heavy. Their faces began to convulse, which was a little twisted. What's more, almost all of their bodies began to shake. A second earlier they were quite normal, but now, they weren't themselves. Wait a second. Don't get so worked up and let's talk like adults. Do not get so worked up. How's that even possible? Talk like adults. How could they talk? They were totally speechless. It is the ancestors of the tribe. The others had no doubt about Xiao Xuan's claim, for they all knew that for generations, only people from the Flaming Horn tribe lived in this area. So, whoever was lost in the mountain should be their ancestors. It was highly likely they were their ancestors. Thinking that Xiao Xuan was carrying the ancestors on his back, the crowd had an intense emotion filling up their chests. They believed in the totem and worshipped their ancestors. For people in the tribe, the totem was sacred for sure, and the word ancestor had its own halo. The others in the tribe were standing still with only their lips trembling. Now, finally they started to move. At first it was only baby steps toward Xiao Xuan. They could effortlessly leap and run during normal hunting missions, but right now, it seemed that just one baby step exhausted all their strength. Gradually, the paces became quicker, but they still were baby steps, as if they would wake up their ancestors if they took a big step, and they had to be as careful as possible. Looking at almost 36 hunting warriors approaching him, Xiao Xuan suddenly wanted to run away. He felt that their facial expressions were much too creepy than what he could bear. When they were only about 3 steps away from Xiao Xuan, Mai in the front of the crowd took the lead and kneeled down in front of Xiao Xuan with one knee. The others all followed Mai and made a serious salute towards him. It was the salute they made to the ancestors. Although unlike the highest salute on bended knees, they were kneeling down on only one knee, the sound of the knees hitting on the ground was loud and clear. Xiao Xuan could almost feel the pain by listening to that sound. What's more, except for Mao, all those warriors were either a lot older than him, or much higher in status than him in the tribe. They were all kneeling down in front of him. Xiao Xuan was speechless. FCK my life. Won't this shorten my life? Xiao Xuan felt 1,000 Caesars howling in his heart. Thinking about that, Xiao Xuan couldn't help but try to move aside for a little bit. Don't move. Mai and the others almost shouted out at the same time, to stop Xiao Xuan's attempt. Xiao Xuan was stunned and he stopped. Seeing people like that, Xiao Xuan really did not know what to do. He was rigid with shock for a while, with only one feeling, that the 4 ancestors were as heavy as steel. And the weight made him sweat a lot. When the others had finished with the salute, Xiao Xuan saw them carefully coming closer to him. Trembling, they untied those 4 ancestors from his back with the highest respect on their faces. Seeing Xiao Xuan having tied those 4 ancestors like that, people felt that Xiao Xuan was disrespectful towards the ancestors. With a closer look, they found that he used the antenna of that hateful insect in the mountain as the rope. Xiao Xuan sat aside, resting, but during which time he was glared at over and over by condemning eyes. However, he had thick skin, so he just sat there as if nothing happened. He wasn't stupid enough to offer explanation to those fanatical people about anything. Apparently they were all soaked in extreme emotions, and no one could reason with them right now. However, even when there was nothing to explain, Xiao Xuan didn't want to be glared at like that. So he diverted the others' attention by telling them what happened in the cave briefly. Earlier, all of them were curious about how Xiao Xuan got out from the cave, but their attention was caught by the ancestors and no one had any interest in other things. Now since Xiao Xuan was willing to speak, all the others paid attention to his tale of survival. Of course Xiao Xuan wouldn't lay his cards open on the table, so he simply narrated the story of how he killed that insect and encountered the kingstone worm. He also made it clear that he hadn't seen the kingstone worm for real, but only experienced the change of environment. Then, he thought about the shaman's lecture. Then, under the guidance of the totem, he found those ancestors. Although he didn't mention the light cover, he shared his speculation with the others, in order to make it clear that those 3 mummies, no, 3 ancestors should better be placed together with the one who had the mysterious bone ornament. I think the bone ornament worn by this ancestor must have special power that could protect the other ancestors. Xiao Xuan disclosed his speculation. The others thought it over and all agreed. They felt comfortable when they came closer to that ancestor, no wonder they were ancestors. Even if the mysterious bone ornament was a precious treasure, no one in the hunting group had thought about keeping it for himself. That was the advantage of being fanatical. No one would forget honor at the prospect of profits, and of course no one would forget about the ancestors or the rules in the tribe. So after having separated those 4 ancestors at first, they respectfully gathered them back together. When Xiao Xuan was describing the scene when he found the 4 ancestors, all the others were shedding tears, feeling that they were the witnesses of that picture of desolation. the ancestors were still thinking about the tribe until their last breath. In order to establish a new hunting route for later generations, they died an honorable death and were trapped in that dark cave for 1,000 years. All warriors felt sad for the ancestors and they were crying heavily. Leng Ga and the other young warriors were lamenting violently as they cried out loud. Why didn't he notice before that they were so emotional? The scene in front of him almost made Xiao Xuan collapse. He tried very hard to keep his expression straight and prevented his face from twitching. In the past, he only knew that people in the tribe worshipped heroes and the chief a lot. But now, he realized that the reverence earlier could never be compared with the reverence they held towards the ancestors. The 4 ancestors had been dead for many years, and for all those years, they had been in the same position of kneeling down on both their knees in the direction of the tribe. So, the warriors in the hunting group were very careful when moving the ancestors. Also, they tried their best to let them kneel down facing the direction of the tribe. There were only 4 bodies, and there were over 30 hunting warriors. Usually, they would fight fiercely against those ferocious beasts, and some of them could knock down a bear with only one single punch. But now, they were all sweating like hell for being very meticulous and reverent. Before every move, they had to think it over and over again. So dealing with the ancestors was physically and mentally straining. However, everyone behaved like they enjoyed it very much with honor. As Xiao Xuan predicted, in the heart of the others in this hunting group, those 4 bodies were very sacred. Although they were dried and hardened, without their original appearances, they were still the ancestors. To be honest, their horrible shapes even made Xiao Xuan think twice before he carried them out. But those terrifying faces and bodies had their own special aura. All the warriors wanted to do another salute after they stood up. Finally, before dusk, they managed to carry the ancestors to the cave of the second location. If in normal days, it would take far less time to march from the mountain foot to the second location. However, this time, with the 4 ancestors, they spent nearly 2 hours on the same distance. When they arrived at the cave, and set those ancestors right in their places, all of the warriors did yet another salute. Some of them even talked about the ancestors in their sleep. Now that this had happened, those hunting warriors had less interest in hunting. Their first wish was to bring the ancestors back to the tribe, so that they could finally return home after hundreds of years of desolation. Surely the ancestors were waiting for that day as well. However, rules were rules. Nobody had set any rules for when one found an ancestor, for the hunting group to go back early. Hunting rules were passed along in generations by the ancestors, so they dared not to disrespect them. According to the hunting schedule, they had to keep hunting for about another 10 days, before they could rejoin the other hunting groups, and then get back to the tribe together. Even though the rules couldn't be broken, people could still alter the minor details. Mai could decide what to do every day. Originally, the hunting region was pretty large and warriors would go on expeditions after they arrived at the second location. Sometimes they would even spend a few nights outside the cave. However, now, Mai told all of them to hunt around the nearby areas and for warriors to take turns to stay in the cave to guard it. With the thorn black wind's attack earlier, people were worried that some other ferocious beasts might break into the cave and hence damage the remains of the ancestors. Even though ferocious beasts were barely seen in this mountain, people had to stay alert about the smaller ones and other unforeseen accidents that might happen. All of them agreed on Mai's suggestion and they took turns in guarding the cave. Days passed. The hunting life was adventurous, and Xiao Xuan had hunted down some really nice prey under the guidance of the senior hunting warriors. It should be enough for him to live on for almost a month. When there were 5 days left before the reunion day, Mai decided to lead the group back. With the ancestors, they had to be more cautious than ever, so it would definitely take longer for them to go back. So in order to meet with the other groups in time, they had to start early. This time, it was very smooth when going through those tunnels in the mountain. No one was left behind. Warriors in the hunting group cut down fine timbers and made a palanquin to carry the ancestors. In Xiao Xuan's eyes, it was simply built, but was enough to use it to take the ancestors home. They knew it at heart that when they got back to the tribe from hunting this time, their game must be the least among all the groups. But they did not care at all. They had 3 thorn black winds stored in the first stronghold. Not to mention that the most important thing was that they had found 4 ancestors, which was even beyond honorable. Guarding the ancestors and taking them back home probably would be the most glorious thing in their whole lives. They felt that now they could die without regrets. Die without regrets. The tribe woke up early in the morning as usual. It was silent initially, and then got noisy gradually. Looking calm and peaceful, Ji yawned as he walked out of his door. It was yet another boring day, and he planned to go to the riverside to check on the kids fishing there. He stretched his body while walking, but all of a sudden, he heard something and looked towards the direction of the sound. It came from the people living near the path of glory. And if you counted the time, you would realize that it was about time for the hunting team to return. These days, the other hunting team was already preparing to set off. When Ji looked along those few people sights and found that on the path of glory, 2 warriors were running up the mountain carrying a man. It seemed that the wounded man was unconscious, and those 2 warriors carrying him were quite anxious. Was he badly wounded? Was it so severe that he could die any minute? The man carried to the top was not a child but an adult, which relieved Ji a little bit. During the days when the hunting team was supposed to return, Old K was in a condition of anxiety almost always. He had not been sleeping well for a long time, and even when Old K was wearing his stiff poker face, the others could tell from that frozen expression that Old K was not in a good mental state. Well, is it that bad? Ji slightly snapped. Or he will be back tomorrow. Since people sent the wounded warrior to the tribe, perhaps the main team would return this afternoon or early tomorrow. Originally, Ji planned to drop by at Old Key's place and tell him the news, but on second thought, Ji decided to wait a little longer to see if there were any more wounded warriors or any unprecedented events first. Many people shared Ji's thoughts, so those who had nothing particular to do just waited along the path of glory for the day. Soon after, Ji and the others in the Mountain Foot district heard a noise, and the noise came from the mountaintop. All of them looked up, only to find that a few people were rushing down from the mountaintop along the path of glory. To their surprise, one of them was the shaman. In the past, when a hunting team returned, the shaman would wait at the end of the path of glory, which was located at the top, to welcome them back. However, now the shaman came down in a hurry. 2 warriors guarded the shaman on both sides, a bit afraid that he might trip or something. It seemed that if the shaman wasn't so old, he would have run down like a gust of wind. When the shaman passed the crowd along the path of glory, Ji and the others could see the expression on the shaman's face clearly. He was always calm and unperturbed usually, but now, he was quite anxious. It seemed that he was about to cry. What the hell happened? Everyone who witnessed the scene was thinking the same question. No matter what had happened, it must be big, or else the shaman wouldn't act this way. Thinking about something big was happening or had happened, everyone became anxious. Ji hurried towards Old Key's place. Suffering from severe insomnia, Old K had bags under his eyes. For the past few days, he had been sitting in the room as usual, since early in the morning to do some stone crafting. The only difference was that he was totally absent-minded. In fact, he knew at heart that it was impossible for him to craft any fine stoneware given his condition. But he wanted to keep himself occupied, or else he wouldn't be able to persuade himself not to wait along the path of glory or wait outside the tribe. How anxiously he waited. Caesar was lying beside his in low spirits as well. His fur had become dim and dark. He was lying on his sides, with a bone in his mouth. When he was bored, he would chew on the bone lazily. All of a sudden, Caesar moved his ears and stood up, with his eyes looking at the window. Old K. G's voice came in from the window, and it was filled with anxiety. Old K was stunned as he was polishing a piece of stoneware roughly. Unconsciously, he pressed down on the half-polished stoneware and broke it into 2 pieces. The next moment, G went inside through the window. Knowing that Old K had no time nor interest in setting traps on the window, G was much bolder and he wasn't as timid when going in through the window as he used to be. What's wrong? Old K started the conversation this time. I don't know, but something big happened. G told Old K what he just saw earlier. Even though he was quite experienced in hunting, Old K couldn't figure out why the shaman acted that way. He had no intention in stone crafting anymore, so he grabbed his cane and left his house. Maybe Caesar also sensed that perhaps the hunting team was about to return. He didn't stay but went out together with Old K. When Old K and G came to the path of glory, almost everyone in the Mountain Foot district was gathered along the path. It was said that many people even went to the perimeters of the tribe, and there were people along the path of glory in mountainside and mountaintop. The shaman's act earlier was unsettling to the crowd, however they couldn't figure out what had happened. Soon, someone came back, and the shaman was still walking in the front. What was different now was that earlier, the shaman's facial expression showed only anxiety, but now, he was shedding tears. The shaman walked down the path and stood at the end of it, looking towards the direction of outside and waiting for the hunting team's return. The man that went outside to inquire about the situation returned as well. Like the shaman, his eyes reddened from excitement. When came back, he whispered something to the others briefly. What? The ancestors. A man with poor self-control yet out loud, stunned. Before he finished his sentence, he was punched down to the ground by the others. Quiet. Since they knew the reason why the shaman was so excited, the unsettling feeling of the crowd reduced. Instead, their excitement rose as time went by. Like how Mai and the others reacted to the news, people in the tribe were totally stunned hearing the news. Only when they heard that the hunting team had arrived, had they recovered from the daze. The hunting team grew bigger. Even though there were less than 200 warriors, but with all the game, it seemed pretty spectacular. However, this time no one in the tribe paid any attention to the game. Instead, they were staring at the wooden palanquin in the front. When they returned to the tribe, Mai and the others had torn down the cover of the palanquin, so that everybody could see the four ancestors kneeling on their knees clearly. In theory, since Xiao Xuan was the one who found the four ancestors, he should be the one lifting the palanquin and bathing in the glory. Unfortunately, he was merely a kid, and it required tall and strong warriors to be the bearers. Relatively speaking, Xiao Xuan was far too short for now. Warriors in the hunting group felt sorry for Xiao Xuan, but in fact, Xiao Xuan didn't share the feeling. It wasn't just lifting the palanquin, all the bearers needed to watch the direction. Because no matter where they were, they needed to guarantee that the four ancestors were always kneeling towards the direction of the tribe. So when they were walking with the ancestors on that palanquin, sometimes they had to alter the angle, while sometimes they had to change the direction. So, all of them seemed just like idiots. We welcome the ancestors returning with all the respect. The shaman shouted out with arms stretching towards the sky. After the shout, he made a standard and sincere salute towards the ancestors. All the others in the tribe kneeled down out of excitement. Xiao Xuan was barely able to drag the game, and his teeth ached listening to the sound of knees hitting on the ground. After making a salute, the shaman stood up and guarded beside the wooden palanquin. He was the shaman of the tribe, and of course it was his honor and duty to guard the ancestors when they returned home. The shaman accompanied the wooden palanquin going up the mountain, but the others kept kneeling down on both knees. Only when the wooden palanquin passed them, did they have the chance to lift their heads and look at the hunting team walking behind. The hunting team kept a distance of about 10 meters with the wooden palanquin. As usual, all the warriors that returned showed their harvest of the game. Compared to the past, Mai's hunting group had much less game, but since they were the ones who found the ancestors, they were the heroes during this hunting mission in the hearts of everyone in the tribe. Xiao Xuan had hunted a lot of game. He carried most of it on his back, but also had a rope in his hand. The other end of the rope was tied on a thorn black wind. Xiao Xuan didn't have enough strength as a kid, so Mao and some other warriors were helping him. Wow. That is, people besides the Path of Glory side at his game. It had ferocious black thorns and armor like hard scales. Even dead, it was like a demon. It was a thorn black wind. And there were 3 of them. Oh, my goodness, it's unbelievable. What was even more unbelievable was that there were 2 kids dragging a thorn black wind at the front. However, with the shock they had from seeing the ancestors, this time they were less shocked at this situation. They were only told that it was Mai's hunting group that found the ancestors, and they did not have the details. Mao was a little ashamed. After all, he hadn't contributed much in hunting down that thorn black wind. Before this hunting mission, he wanted to make Xiao Xuan yield to him. However, unexpectedly, he was the useless one when there was a real fight. Xiao Xuan looked around and spotted old K and Ji, who were standing at the outer circle of the crowd. Caesar was also there, wagging his tail crazily, with pleasure. Xiao Xuan smiled at their direction, but deep down inside, he was thinking about how to tell old K about the toothed sword later. After they arrived at the end of the Path of Glory, all the warriors of the hunting team put down their game aside, for they had a ceremony to attend before they could call it a successful conclusion of the hunting mission. The shaman asked the bearers to place the wooden palanquin down inside the fire pit. Since there was only a small ball of flame in the fire pit, there was enough space for the palanquin. Those legs of the 4 bearers almost gave out when they finally put down the palanquin. They were neither afraid nor nervous. In fact, they were too excited. From their perspectives, it was a great honor, and serving as the ancestors' bearer was an experience that they could share with their sons and grandsons in the future. After carefully laying down the palanquin in the fire pit, those 4 warriors left, while the shaman came in to prostrate himself in front of the ancestors. Xiao Xuan had no idea about the status of the ancestors, but judging from the shaman's behavior, he guessed that the one with the bone ornament was the most important person among those 4. The shaman made a careful salute towards him especially. After the salute, the shaman left the fire pit, for he still needed to host the sword cleansing ritual for the warriors that had just returned from the hunting mission. The shaman commanded some people to help him carry out a long stone trough, filled with gray water. It had a fresh smell, like the plants in the forest, but Xiaoxuan didn't know how it was prepared. Every leader of a hunting group would take his members to cleanse their weapons. The sword cleansing ritual's purpose was to remove the blood's contamination from the sword after a hunting mission, and to take away the ferocious killing spirit which had been brought back from the mountains. By doing so, it could calm down the warriors who were still immersed in the killing and hunting mindset and ease their minds of the surging killing thoughts. When you say sword cleansing, in fact it not only referred to swords but the stone spears, axes, and other hunting tools also needed to be washed. Naturally, the first batch of warriors to do the cleansing were the main leader and warriors from the advance party. Then other hunting groups would approach. The stoneware that Xiaoxuan found beside the ancestors were turned over to the leaders once their hunting team had assembled, and now all the stoneware was in the hands of the main leader. Indeed, those were made from really fine stones, but it was impossible for Xiaoxuan to keep them. The tribe was the tribe, and with so many eyes fixed on him, he would be an idiot to secretly embezzle them. It was a better option to turn over the tools, for he trusted the shaman and the chief would certainly reward him according to his effort, and then he should have his part of the fine stones. In fact, Xiaoxuan could be considered as the main contributor to the hunting team, since he had slaughtered a thorn black wind and found the ancestors to bring them back. Because of that, when it was Xiaoxuan's turn to cleanse the weapons, the shaman specially arranged his position in front of the stone trough. In general, only the best performer during the hunting mission could get to stand behind the middle part of the stone trough and cleanse his weapons there. It was the position right in front of the shaman, and on most occasions in the past, the leaders of those hunting groups were the ones in that position. However, this time it was Xiaoxuan, but neither Mai nor the others had any problem with that. Staring at Xiaoxuan in front of him, the shaman looked extremely gentle and kind. Since Xiaoxuan had such an eye-catching performance during the hunt, and the discovery of ancestors gave a powerful shock to everyone in the tribe, Xiaoxuan had almost every warrior's attention when he was walking towards his sword-cleansing place. When they met the other hunting groups in the forest, he didn't get much attention due to limited time and tight schedule. Now since everyone was home, they decided to take a closer look at the legendary kid. Even the chief and the main leader were staring at him. When everyone in his hunting group took up their positions behind the stone trough, the shaman lifted his hands to indicate that warriors might start cleansing their weapons. Xiaoxuan had observed on how others were cleansing their weapons earlier, so now he knew what to do. Xiaoxuan took out all the spearheads and stone swords that he had taken with him, and placed them inside the stone trough carefully one by one. After he had done all that, he thought for a while, before he took out the very last one. When Xiaoxuan pulled out the tooth sword he got from Old K, he took out the broken sword point as well. Among the warriors staring at him, many of them had recognized that sword made out of a ground Komodo's tooth. Even if they did not know who it belonged to in the past, they knew the material of the sword. Some elite warriors in the tribe also had similar swords of the same materials, but they all inherited those swords from their elders. It was such a fine sword made out of a ground Komodo's tooth, but it was broken just like that. The user was merely a kid. Did he really have the strength to cause that? What the FCK? What the hell happened? Some warriors were glaring at the broken sword point and their eyes almost poked out. Not only the warriors, the shaman's gentle face also froze. A second later, he thought about the kid pretending to sing the song of hunting in the crowd before. He was really not the same as others. Xiaoxuan felt the gazes of people on him, but he chose to ignore them. With 2 hands, he placed the tooth sword into the stone trough, and soaked the sword in the gray liquid. There was red blood of the thorn black wind and brown liquid of that insect from the cave on the sword, which wasn't completely cleaned away before when Xiaoxuan used water to clean it. However, when the shaman finished with the spell and told them to take out their stoneware, Xiaoxuan was surprised to find that there was no mark on the sword anymore, and all the stoneware continued to shine brightly as if they were never brought to a hunting mission. When the sword cleansing ritual was over, all the warriors felt relieved and their minds too seemed to be cleansed. Considering that Xiaoxuan wasn't strong enough, and given that he had hunted a lot of game, the shaman told Xiaoxuan to go back first, and that he would send someone to help deliver the meat to his place later. Without having to carry the meat by himself, Xiaoxuan could save his strength. He didn't worry that someone would be greedy for his share. At Xiaoxuan's departure, Kiki carefully poked the main leader of the hunting team and glimpsed at Xiaoxuan's back before he looked up at the main leader. The main leader looked very serious, but gave a small nod. Kiki got the permission and suddenly had a big smile on his face. He paid no more attention to the game and asked Tuo to help him take care of his part while he ran toward Xiaoxuan. The main leader was contemplating, but he felt something and looked up, only to find his father looking at him. Immediately he smiled subserviently at the chief, unlike his usual behavior as the main leader of a hunting team. The chief frowned, thinking about what his son was up to. He glanced at Mao standing aside. Perhaps it concerned Mao. He knew a little bit about Mao having some problems with Xiaoxuan, but he also considered it as a harmless competition within the tribe. According to the tradition, no elders in the tribe should interfere with harmless competitions, let alone that this time Xiaoxuan had repeatedly distinguished himself in the tribe. He couldn't be bullied. As he was about to approach his son about it, the shaman summoned him. It was something about the ancestors. Now that it was about the ancestors, naturally the chief couldn't afford any delay. But before he left with the shaman, he glared at his son, warning him not to do anything stupid. The main leader of the hunting team didn't pay any attention to his old man's glare, but continued his contemplation. Meanwhile, Xiaoxuan went down the mountain empty-handed. He didn't take the path of glory or any other crowded places. Instead, he specifically picked those secluded routes to go down the mountain. At that time, almost all the families were busy greeting the hunting warriors who returned home or dealing with the food they brought back. On Xiaoxuan's way, there were only a few people wandering around. Xiaoxuan was still trying to figure out what he should tell old K about the toothed sword, but he suddenly felt something behind, so he stopped. Cold glint flashed in his eyes, and without looking at the approaching fist, Xiaoxuan crooked his neck and moved his legs. He dodged easily and avoided the sneak attack from behind. Despite his first attack missing, the man didn't stop and continued attacking Xiaoxuan. It was no slower than the first strike, and almost at the same time Xiaoxuan avoided the first one, the others followed. There was no room for Xiaoxuan to dodge, so he put up his arms so as to block the fists. His tiny body was forced to step back because of the fierce strength of his opponent. For every step he withdrew, the stones under his feet cracked. The sound it created was like the rumbling of thunder before a storm. However, the other side still pressed on against him step by step. When Xiaoxuan took a step back, his opponent would take a step forward, and for every step he took, he would punch Xiaoxuan's arms for one more time. So many strikes allowed Xiaoxuan no time to dodge the hits. A moment earlier, the dust was floating up in the air, yet a moment later, it was scattered due to the punches. The other side was much stronger than Xiaoxuan, and his skill was of course higher. Also, with his dense strikes, he basically suppressed Xiaoxuan with his strength. Xiaoxuan felt a surge of blood in his throat, and finally, there was a cracking sound coming from his arm. With that sound, Xiaoxuan flew back and stumbled backwards after he landed. It took him some effort to remain standing there and swallow down the blood he had in his mouth. This time, the other side didn't continue to attack. When both sides calmed down, the totemic patterns on their bodies faded away. When he managed to stand still, Xiaoxuan breathed heavily. He paid no attention to his broken arm, anyways it was not a severe wound. He fixed his eyes on his opponent, Kiki. Although Kiki had no killing intent, and earlier he just went through the sword cleansing ritual. But due to his long hunting career, his every act and every move was filled with a ferocious air. Good. Seeing that Xiaoxuan could still keep standing there after he suffered so many strikes yet showed no painful expression, Kiki was pretty satisfied. Xiaoxuan didn't even seem to care about his broken arm. However, at the voice of good, Kiki was kicked down. It was Tuo that kicked down Kiki. He was checking on the situation under the main leader's command. However, the first scene he saw was Kiki breaking that kid's arm. What the hell, Kiki? The main leader asked you to test him, and that was how you test him. You are at least an adult warrior, with much higher strength than him. Why did you bully such a kid by attacking him that way? To prove that you were good. Aren't you ashamed of yourself? The shaman and the chief would punish us hard if they knew. Tuo was furious and he stepped on Kiki again, seeing that he was about to get up. You are such a tactless moron. Tuo retrieved his foot from Kek's back and looked at Xiaoxuan with a smile. He did not mean harm. Tuo was trying to seem nice. Xiaoxuan looked at his arm which had just cracked and looked up at Tuo again, poker-faced, as if saying, what, he did not mean harm, but he broke my arm. Tuo had cursed Kiki in his heart for 1,000 times, but on his face, it was still a smile full of apologies. He searched his animal skin bag, and pulled out a bag of herbs wrapped in tree leaves. These are fine herbs. Your arm will be okay in a few days if you drink it. Xiaoxuan still stared at Tuo, poker-faced. When Tuo was feeling creepy from the stare, Xiaoxuan looked down at his own animal skin bag. Tuo immediately knew what Xiaoxuan was suggesting. He silently blamed himself for being so careless. Kiki had just broken his arm, so how could he receive the herbs from Tuo? Placing the herbs inside Xiaoxuan's animal skin bag, Tuo smiled at Xiaoxuan regretfully again. He's a moron who knows nothing. Please, kindly forgive him, okay? Given that we are in the same hunting team, haha. FCK your sister. Xiao Xuan thought as he continued staring. Tuo was too embarrassed to face Xiao Xuan's stare, so he went towards Kiki and dragged him away. Xiao Xuan looked at their backs and wondered why they acted the way they did. When Xiao Xuan went down the mountain, he came directly to Old Key's place instead of going back to his residence. Caesar had been waiting for Xiao Xuan at the door for a long time. Seeing Xiao Xuan, he immediately leapt towards him and greeted him by jumping back and forth like a dog. Seriously speaking, he would be more like a dog if he wagged his tail a little. Hey, Xuan's back. Ji sat by the window and lifted the straw curtain as he spoke to Xiao Xuan. Uncle Ji. Xiao Xuan evaded Caesar so as to prevent him from touching his wounded arm and walked inside. Inside the house, Old K sat upon the stone stool which he used to craft stoneware and stared at Xiao Xuan. He was smiling, which was rare. It's good that you're back. What's wrong with your arm? Of course, Xiao Xuan's wounded arm was noticed by Old K in a single glance. Earlier when he was on the path of glory with the other warriors, he was fine and was carrying lots of game. There was no sign of injuries back then, but why was his arm wounded after the sword cleansing ritual? Upon notice, Old K scowled again after that rare smile. Let me see. Ji didn't notice it, so he approached Xiao Xuan to take a closer look at his arm since Old K said that. It's fine. I'll be okay after a few days. Seeing that Old K wanted to know the details, Xiao Xuan told him about earlier when he encountered Kiki and Tuo on his way down the mountain. At Xiao Xuan's description, Old K thought about it for some time, and then asked Xiao Xuan to show him his arm. Old K sniffed his nose. Is this the herb that Tuo gave you? Old K took out the bag of herbs in Xiao Xuan's animal skin bag and closely observed those few herbs inside. These are fine herbs. He passed the bag of herbs to Ji, who was stretching his neck to look at the bag. Go and decoct them. Ji said nothing, but he put the bag beneath his nose and sniffed it. However, there was nothing inside that he was familiar with. He hadn't used such herbs before. It smelled completely different from the herbs he normally used. Old K asked about the hunting, and Xiao Xuan briefly said something about it. Even though he had omitted a lot, it was still quite an adventure in Old K and Ji's ears. They still saw it as an alarmingly dangerous mission, and neither of them had anticipated that Xiao Xuan would encounter so many things during his first hunting trip. His survival was completely under the blessing of the ancestors. So it seems that the ground Komodo tooth sword helped a lot. Ji rubbed his hands and smirked at Xiao Xuan, indicating that Xiao Xuan should take out the tooth sword so that he could admire it once again. Xiao Xuan began to stammer immediately. What? Did you lose it? Ji's heart constricted, and he glimpsed at the thing on Xiao Xuan's waist. It was indeed the leather sheath of the ground Komodo tooth sword. No, I didn't lose it, but Xiao Xuan embarrassedly took out the sword from the leather sheath. The ground Komodo tooth sword was even cleaner than when it was given to Xiao Xuan from Old K, for it was freshly cleansed. However, the missing sword tip was clearer than ever, which could be noticed at first sight. It was completely unbelievable to Ji. He took over the sword with trembling hands and was more than distressed. Xiao Xuan looked up at Old K, only to find that he wasn't as distressed at the sword as Ji, neither was he angry. Instead, he seemed quite gratified. Old K took the sword over from Ji and had a joyful smile on his face. Don't worry, I can craft and polish it into a smaller sword, and you can use it during your second hunting trip. Saying that, Old K placed the tooth sword on the shelf aside. He decided to take up no other tasks these days and focus on polishing and adjusting the tooth sword. The sword suffered from serious wear and tear, and there were a lot of small dents. However, Old K was quite happy about that, because all those traces proved that Xiao Xuan had a very successful hunt, and he had fought against some ferocious beasts. Instead, if the sword Xiao Xuan brought back was as good as new with little or no abrasion, he would be a little disappointed and upset, even though he probably wouldn't say anything. Old K drove away Ji, who was still sad over the sword, and he asked Xiao Xuan to drink the potion properly decocted from the herbs. Downing the bowl of potion in his hand, Xiao Xuan suddenly felt as if a spring of warmth swept over his entire body and made a special stop at his wounded arms. Instead of pain, he felt warm and fuzzy. He could even feel the bones growing back together gradually at a pace which wasn't slow. Those are the herbs that the shaman himself mixed especially. Since some of the herbs are really hard to find, so it would only be distributed to a few warriors. It's impossible for everyone to get it, said Old K. Because of that, whoever could get the herbs must cherish them a lot. Unexpectedly, Tuo gave a whole pack to Xiao Xuan. Old K was confused. Even though it was Kiki who broke Xiao Xuan's arm, but honestly speaking, that wasn't considered as a severe injury in the tribe. Those with fine physiques would recover naturally after a few days. Ashwin wasn't familiar with Tuo. If they were in the same hunting group, it would make some sense, but the same hunting group. Old K shook his head. Ashwin had only awakened this year, and he took one hunting trip. Technically he was nothing else but a fine new warrior. It was highly unlikely for him to be picked out to that hunting group. After all, it required the team leaders and the other few senior warriors' permission to get into that hunting group. Since it was hard to figure out, Old K decided to let it go. Even though I have only one leg, I can still avenge you. Just wait to see Kek's arm the next time you see him. No need for that. Xiaoxuan smiled, I can avenge myself. Good. Then I won't interfere. Old K seemed to be more satisfied. Now, display your totem power, Ashwen. Xiaoxuan quickly revealed the totem pattern on his face, as well as on his arms. Old K stared at the totem patterns on his arms, and his eyes were wide open. Click. The cane in Old K's hand was broken into half, and he had been using that cane for only a year. At the other side, the team leader just finished up with all the formalities at the mountaintop and returned to his own place after the hunting mission, only to find that Tuo and Kiki were already waiting for him inside. So how was the test? The main leader Ta asked. Before Kiki could say anything, Tuo reported that Kiki had broken Xiaoxuan's arm. Blue veins stood out on Ta's temples, and he glared at Kiki hatefully, as if he was about to kick him again. That was how you tested him? Kiki was sitting on the ground with his legs crossed. He scratched his foot and said, I didn't attack using full strength. You plan to attack using full strength? Where's your integrity, you moron? Ta brandished his fist at him. Kiki jumped up and within the blink of an eye he got next to the door, as if he was planning to escape once Ta made any move. I was just out of control. Kiki whispered as he scratched his head with the same hand he scratched his foot. He indeed felt a little embarrassed, thinking that he hit a kid after all. Since you can't control yourself, you'd better tag along with other hunting groups next time. Ta said with a straight face. No, I can explain. Kiki was anxious seeing that he was about to be kicked out from the group. You told me to test that kid, right, boss? I tested. In fact, I was only about to punch him twice, but seeing the totem patterns emerge on his arms, I couldn't control myself and kept punching. Totem patterns. What's wrong with the kid's totem pattern? Ta stared at Kiki with sharp sights. Boss, you said that newly awakened warriors only had totem patterns up to here, right? Kiki placed his finger at his upper arm near the shoulder. However, that kid's totem pattern reached there. Kiki made a mark on his upper arm, which was about a palm's away from the shoulder. That's not possible. Ta and Tuo shouted out at the same time. But impossible. Nothing's impossible. In the past, people said that children from the orphan cave wouldn't be able to be awakened until they turned 12 or 13, but now. In the past, people thought that junior totem warrior couldn't even slaughter or fight against adult healthy thorn blackwind even when there were only 1 or 2 of them. However, in the past, people assumed that no one could get out of that mountain once lost, but in the end, the kid hadn't been awakened for long. Hey, boss. I remembered that Mao's totem pattern was only up there. Before Kiki could finish his sentence, he got kicked on the leg by Tuo already. Fine, you guys go back now. Ta waved his hand, indicating that they should leave for now. Tuo and Kiki pushed each other out of the door, but as they stepped out, they realized that the chief was standing right outside. Ah, haha, good day, chief. In a hurry, Tuo and Kiki hurried out after a quick salute. Xiaoxuan only took Caesar back to his cabin after having dinner at Old Key's place. Although he had been away for over 20 days, it was obvious that someone had helped keep his room clean. There was clean water filled in the crock. It was still fresh, so Xiaoxuan figured it must have been poured in recently. Also, the animal skin on the bed had been washed and air-dried, for it had no bugs or stale smell on it. Apparently, Old K had asked someone to do all that. Xiaoxuan moved his arm a little after he lit bonfire. It had only been 3 hours, and Xiaoxuan could feel that his bones were healing quickly. Indeed, those were fine herbs. As for the totem patterns on his body, he knew that he was making more progress than his peers. Among the newly awakened warriors this year, Mao was the publicly acknowledged genius in the tribe, and the totem patterns on his arms only spread out about half a finger's length. When they were hunting, no one had the spare time nor the energy to pay attention to Xiaoxuan's totem patterns, even though he was wearing a sleeveless top made from animal skin. Instead, everyone had their attention focused on the prey, for one negligent move could result in death, especially in the forests filled with dangers and risks. All of the warriors were extremely cautious. Also, since Xiaoshuan was pretty skilled in using his totem power, his patterns would quickly disappear after the prey was hunted down, before anybody had the spare time to look around. Hence, no one had noticed the astonishing length of his totem patterns. Just now, old K had broken his cane out of shock. He didn't believe his eyes at first glance, but after he rubbed them and took a closer look, he finally confirmed that what he saw was real. Naturally, someone else would also be totally stunned if he saw that, for example, Kiki. In fact, Xiaoshuan had noticed that Kiki glanced at his arm after the first punch. His attack was not really fatal, and Xiaoshuan knew it was merely a test. However, what Xiaoshuan didn't know was why Kiki and Tuo did that. Lying on the bed, Xiaoshuan had finally felt his tense nerves relax after so many days. Life inside the tribe was indeed safe and cozy. Waking up the next morning, after a good night's sleep, Xiaoshuan stretched his body. Surprisingly, he found that his arm was already healed, which was even faster than old Key's estimate of a few days. In fact, he could have recovered quickly even without the herbs he took yesterday. Xiaoshuan made a pot of soup with meat jerky and wild fruits for Caesar and himself. It was not tasty, but he was used to it already. The soup was not much, leaving Xiaoshuan and Caesar still hungry. So he patted Caesar on his head and said, "You'll have your feast once the meat is delivered." Caesar smacked his lips, while he slowly yawned and stretched. Seeing Caesar's foolish appearance, Xiaoshuan once again thought about the wolf packs hunting when he was on his way to the second location. Compared to the wolves in the forest, Caesar really did not have a wolf's nature, and if he continued to behave that way, perhaps he would really turn into a dog. Xiaoshuan was not sure whether it was a blessing or a curse. Xiaoshuan took a quick shower with a bucket of water, and then dragged Caesar outside and used a fish teeth brush to clean him. It had been over 20 days, and that little beast was rolling on the ground all day long. Perhaps Ji also had a hand in it, as there were lots of kinks and knots in his hair. Old K would help Xiaoshuan clean his house, but that didn't mean that he would help clean Caesar. In the eyes of Old K, Caesar was still leftover prey. Why would anyone clean prey? When Tuo and Kiki were delivering the meat to Xiaoshuan's place, they found that Xiaoshuan was brushing Caesar's hair outside. The shaman had arranged someone else to do the delivery, but Tuo and Kiki asked for the job on their own. "Oh. Is your arm all right?" They watched Xiaoshuan nimbly brush Caesar's hair, having no traces of an injury at all. Kiki put the meat down and instantly he wanted to approach to check on Xiaoshuan's arm, but he was stopped by Tuo. Kiki was about to struggle, but Tuo silently said the team leader, causing Kiki to quiet down immediately. When he returned yesterday, he was dragged out and beaten up by the team leader, so his face was still swollen today. When Tuo and Kiki carried the meat inside, Xiaoshuan thanked them with a smile. He also wanted to give them some meat as gifts, but got declined politely by Tuo. Tuo noticed that although Xiaoshuan was not wearing a poker face, he also wasn't enthusiastic. However, he couldn't really blame Xiaoshuan for that. After all, Kiki had broken his arm only yesterday. Tuo smiled, a little embarrassed. "Well, the shaman said that early in the morning on the day after tomorrow everyone should go to the mountaintop dressed neatly and cleanly, so as to attend the memorial ceremony for the ancestors." Instead of staying for longer, Tuo dragged Kiki away, for he worried Kiki might start some trouble again. After Xiaoshuan had finished brushing Caesar's hair, he went inside to check on the food that was delivered. All of the meat had been properly processed by someone. Even the thorn black wind had been skinned and chopped by some skilled warrior. A thorn black wind had 2 layers of skins, one was the hard scales, and the other was very tough thick leather. The 2 layers had been separated and specially processed, so there was no trace of blood, and they were pretty clean. Caesar was standing still about 2 meters away from the meat chunks of the thorn black wind, curious and afraid at the same time. However, he was drooling over the meat, so he growled and ran his tongue around his lips. Xiaoshuan took out the smallest piece of the thorn black wind's meat. After a second thought though, he cut the meat again and tossed the smallest part to Caesar. Advanced prey contained a lot of energy, and Xiaoshuan had no idea how much Caesar would be able to take. Looking at the pile of food, Xiaoshuan calculated for how much salt he could trade with the tribe. To attend the memorial ceremony of the ancestors later, everyone in the tribe became quite busy. They took out the things that they were most pleased with, since the memorial ceremony could be compared to the snow festival. The other hunting team, which was supposed to set off right away, was instead delayed for a few days and would start the hunting mission after the memorial ceremony. Xiaoshuan asked some tailor to make him a jacket out of the scale layer of the thorn black wind. It was like an armor, and although it looked stupid, it was necessary for him to make a good impression. It was the most direct way for someone to show his ability in the tribe, and Xiaoshuan had to observe the customs of the place. Of course, Xiaoshuan didn't forget to send some scaly skins and meat to Mao. After all, he had contributed to the hunting of the thorn black wind. Only 50 days after the snow festival ceremony, there was yet another grand ceremony within the tribe. It was not as complicated as the one during the snow festival regarding rules and procedures, and no one danced. Xiao Xuan was arranged to stand at the spot closest to the fire pit. Being the real star in finding the ancestors, he was qualified enough to have the position, and no one else in the tribe was against the decision. Because of that, there was only one skinny body among the ones that were standing near the fire pit, and it was Xiao Xuan. This time, Xiao Xuan didn't dare to allow his mind to drift away. Instead, he paid attention in following the others in this memorial ceremony of their ancestors. He was whispering at heart, "Dear ancestors, please kindly give us your blessings in the hunting missions to come. Please shelter us from those troubles." The 4 ancestors were cremated in the fire pit. Originally the flame in the fire pit harmed no one, but now it had wrapped up all those dried bodies. Soon enough, 4 bodies gradually disappeared, and there wasn't even smoke or dirt created. When the flame returned to its normal size, the fire pit went back to normal. There were no ashes of the dead, nothing was left there. Everyone who passes away in the tribe will be cremated like that, but not everyone has the honor to have such a grand ceremony during the cremation. Let alone that this memorial ceremony was not second to the snow festival on scale. Xiao Xuan noticed that the bone ornament was gone. Obviously it was retained by the shaman. It's reasonable, burning such a treasure would be unwise. After the sincere worship and prayers, Xiao Xuan was summoned by the shaman after the memorial ceremony. He asked Xiao Xuan about the things that happened in the cave, and it was far more detailed than the others' questioning. Also, the shaman was paying extra attention to the feelings that Xiao Xuan had back in the cave, the so-called totem guidance. Xiao Xuan had explained things properly, but he also played dumb when it was necessary. Finally, he went back home after being questioned for about an hour. When Xiao Xuan left, the shaman took out a small box made from jade. He opened it carefully and there were 3 similar bone ornaments lying inside. Xiao Xuan would be totally surprised if he were here. It turned out that there were more of them. However, the little ball in the middle of the bone ornament was no longer glossy. Instead, it appeared dim. Beside the jade box, there was a roll of animal skin. It didn't look ancient, but in fact, it was more than 1,000 years old. The shaman unfolded the roll and inside there were some simple pictures with the appearance of the bone ornaments. Finally, all were found. The shaman sighed. If there was someone else in the room, he or she would be quite confused. 6 bone ornaments were drawn on the animal skill roll, but there were only 3 of them in the box. Why did the shaman say all were found? Thinking about Xiao Xuan's answers, the shaman had a trace of smile on his sad face. He knew that Xiao Xuan wasn't telling the complete truth, but that was fine. The power of the flame will guide you in the right direction. Just like in ancient times, when our ancestors used fire to light up the night. The shaman had said that, but in fact, there were very few people who could do that. Even if they had the feeling, it was just a blurry one, and almost none of them had an image or a concept as clear as Xiao Xuan's. No one could depend on the blurry hints to walk out of the cave. It would be exactly like how the 3 ancestors had the feeling and they found the elder at last. However, they couldn't get out from the cave. Recalling Xiao Xuan's abnormal behavior when he was awakened, the shaman figured his awakening was more like an awakening under the support of a complete flame. Was that the difference between the complete flame and the incomplete flame? The shaman stared at the bone ornaments in front of him. He reached out with his withered hand and touched the dim ball in the middle of the ornament slightly. Then, he put the animal skin roll back and covered the box with its lid before putting it back where it was. Taking 2 steps back, the shaman stared at the box silently and made a sincere salute. The Elder. It was a title that had been heard in the tribe for 1,000 years. He wondered when someone would be addressed by that title again. Like and subscribe.